Welcome to this month's edition of the Light on Conspiracies newsletter. And today I have this incredible honor and privilege to speak to no one less than Alfred Webre, who has a CV that will just make your, I don't know what to say, but absolutely mind-blowing CV. He's an author, lawyer, futurist, peace activist, environmental activist, and a space activist who has promoted the ban of space weapons. He's been into so many incredible things that really has been part of changing the history of the world. And for those of you who know me, you will know that I do not easily impress, but this man is one incredible human being, a true warrior in the real meaning, coming from the heart and doing everything he can to change the world into a much more beautiful place for the rest of us. So I have this, once again, enormous joy to say welcome to Alfred.
Ole, well, thank you so much. And what you told me, I see a reflection in yourself as well. So
That's very kind of you to say so. Listen, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, just a quick one, where you grew up
sure.
and how you came to a position where you are, and what has happened through your life?
Yeah, well, I was trained both, I have degrees both as a lawyer and as a psychotherapist. And I came up through law. I've been a Wall Street lawyer. I've been an environmental lawyer the with the Environmental Protection Administration of the city of New York. And back in the 70s when the environmental movement first started. And then I became a futurist at Stanford Research Institute. And it was around that time that I really began to focus on what I call the multidimensional aspect of things and look more deeply into the covert forces that are manifesting as what we call overt reality, especially in the political process. And that led me to my position today. I've carried out various roles in non-governmental organizations. I've been uh, the, leader of NGOs at the UN. I've been a war crimes judge. I've worn many different hats, but all of them have been sort of to facilitate what has been a life mission to try and break up uh, what appears to be a determined policy by a matrix to impose a world of death, disease, and oppression, and bring a more enlightened world. So that's my kind of approach. And so in the course of that, we fought many different battles, and four of them are in sort of the political and legal area with various major false flags and war crimes events. And I thought that we could discuss briefly four of them that your viewers may be interested in. I'll just mention the four briefly, and then I'll let you go through them as you wish. The first is with you being one of the world's foremost scholars on the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. Well, I was involved in the helping create the House Select Committee on Assassinations with Representative Henry B. Gonzalez, the chairman of the U.S. House of Representatives Banking Committee. and we can talk about how that was born and then all the processes that happened there. And that would have, if it had been allowed to go forward and succeeded, would have solved the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X, all of which were political assassinations. And you know a lot about the background there. The second is the false flag operation of 9/11, September 11th, 2001. Well, together with a number of other outstanding researchers, we developed something called the 9/11 Independent Prosecutor Act to prosecute some of what we found to be the leading principles behind the false flag operation with an independent prosecutor. And we met with the head of the House Judiciary Committee, Representative John Conyers, at his office, and we can talk about that in November 2006. The third is the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, where as a judge, I was one of the judges on the bench, we found Tony Blair, George W. Bush, Richard B. Cheney, Donald H. Rumsfeld guilty of the highest level of war crimes for the invasion of Iraq. And finally, in the ITCCS, International Common Law Courts of Justice, we now have a trial starting in Brussels against the Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, and Queen Elizabeth Windsor of the UK. It's starting in March of 2014 for child genocide and child trafficking. And we have, substantial witnesses. We have a witness who was a member of the Argentine government at the time of the junta when Bergoglio was in Argentina, and showing his culpability of direct involvement in child trafficking, which is a war crime. So all of these are battles which, have happened and are ongoing. So I hand it back over to you.
I just want to say the thing that I think you're showing the most is that it is possible for us to break this. It is possible for us to lift this beautiful word into where it's supposed to be. And you're doing it in such a distinct way and such, I'm speechless because it is, I'm just so in awe of your bravery and what you have been trying and succeeded to achieve in your life. I must say that it's extremely impressive. And also for a researcher like myself, a thing like being part of the House Select Committee of Assassinations, had that not been, I don't know where we would have been today, even though, it was really, as far as I understand, it was really in the end infiltrated by the CIA and totally chopped the feet of it all. But at the same time, what happened around that thing was so important. Also, because of all these witnesses being called to court, and then instead of giving evidence, instead they were silenced, which was very speaking in itself. But would you mind starting with that, how that came around and how you experienced the whole thing? You just tell us whatever you would like around that.
Sure. Well, I will tell you my part in it and what I know. This came about as the result of efforts of large groups of activists and people who were moving this issue forward, and authors, such as Mark Lane and others who brought the issue forward. Well, the way that I became involved was, of course, the assassination of John F. Kennedy was, everyone who was alive at the time remembers where they were on that day. It was a global event, and it was designed by the executors of that event, of that false flag, to be a shock a global shock, and very much in the line with the 9/11s. It's a global power matrix trying to subdue and bring the world population into a very dark place. So around 1973, with Watergate, I started writing my first book, and got it published by G.P. Putnam's with a professor. My co-author was a professor of experimental psychology at Rutgers University, and so G.P. Putnam's published it, and then between the hardback and the mass paperback, there was a matter of fact, I have a copy of the mass paperback here. This was in all of the airport book stores. There were 85,000 copies published at the time, which is a big number back in the 70s. And at that time, the John F. Kennedy assassination. This is the early 70s. Very few books had been published. It was very hard to get that into print. You know, there was a lot of, underground memos, and there was a sort of an underground network of researchers who I knew and would get to know more. But what we did is, between the hardcover edition and the paperback, is we took the galleys of the paperback and inserted a whole section on the John F. Kennedy assassination in there, and sent it off to the publishers, to the printers. So we snuck it in, and then it was published and sent to all, to all the bookstores. It was a major book, right? And that's how you had to operate. Do you see what I'm saying? And so meanwhile, I was, because this book was a mass paperback from a major publisher, we had access to the major media. I was on talk shows major media talk shows in the U.S. and here in Canada, on the CBC Peter Zowski, which is like the equivalent of the Today Show or the Tonight Show, things like that. So we began to get this issue out, and our analysis of the JFK assassination was very advanced for the time. It was very advanced. We went right down to the key facts, and we just went right down to, okay, not only was this an inside job, we just pointed to all of the high inside agencies that pulled it off, And so then after that, what I did is I said, this thing has to really get investigated, because I had been in government in the city of New York and had a fairly prominent position there. I was in the newspapers every week, in the New York Post, and I was sort of a well-known figure in government, an up-and-coming crusading environmental lawyer, and I decided that we should have, should point to congressional investigations, okay? And other people were having the same types of thoughts all around the country, but I'm just saying that this is what I did. And I began to write to prominent people and prominent authors and political people. I, met with the head of the ACLU in New York, and they said, "Hey, this, you're really on to something." And these are all people who, since the assassination a decade earlier, they had to remain quiet, but they knew that something was wrong, but it was prohibited to talk about it. So, but I was like leading it, and I had been, a cooperating attorney with the New York, with the ACLU. I'd been trying cases for them, and so and people people gave money, gave me a donation. So I set up this fund and this foundation to it was called the CCCIPA, the Campaign for a Congressional Investigation into Political Assassinations, because I saw that political assassinations were being used as a tool for destabilization and taking away the political rights of the nation. And you yourself have come to that same conclusion by unearthing the operations of CIA Operation 40. At that time, we did not have that name, CIA Operation 40, but we had a lot of the basic, some of the basic facts. So one day I got a call from Representative Henry B. Gonzalez's office in Washington. He's the chairman of the House, was then the chairman of the House Banking Committee, asked me to come down and have lunch with him in Washington to talk about the Kennedy assassination. So I got down there, and he says, well, we want to start a congressional investigation. I said, fine. And I said, here, I've got all these, names. And he said, well, look, send me all your material and I'll send it out under my office. So he sent out this great mailing under the office, under his congressional office, that I had designed for a congressional hearing. And then we started, coordinated and working together. And there were a number of other people. There was Mark Lane's Citizen Commission of Inquiry, Bud Festerwall's Committee to Investigate Assassination, the Assassination Information Bureau. There were all these organizations. And then we started working with Mrs. Martin Luther King and the Black Caucus. And it was the Black Caucus and Mrs. Martin Luther King that then came together and got the votes together to get the House Select Committee on Assassination started. And then at that time, I was living in New York. I was living in the Soho area. My then wife was an architect, and we had taken a loft and made it into a very, kind of a modern space that had been featured in New York Magazine. And so I said, look, we've got to go up. We got to join forces. So I went up to Boston and met with the Assassination Information Bureau, which were about 6 or 7 people that had been going around college campuses around the U.S. giving lectures on the John Kennedy assassination, people like Carl Oglesby. And I said, look, we just met with Gonzalez. He wants to get we got a congressional investigation going. Why don't we go down to Washington, get a house, and we can act as the watchdog, as the public watchdog, to make sure that the committee is not infiltrated and that everything is honest. So they said, yeah, let's go. So we went back to New York, and we got the novelist Norman Mailer involved. And, so it became like this real kind of, liberal. I mean, everybody was like that. there was a lot of adrenaline going, put it that way. And we went down to Washington and got a safe house on near DuPont Circle, and where the Assassination Information Bureau was, and meanwhile the select committee started, and they brought in Richard Sprague, one of the former district attorneys of a former district attorney as the chief attorney there, and he was very cognizant, and the CIA, who was running CIA Operation 40, they would have been exposed by the HSCA because Sprague knew that it was the CIA Operation 40 that was doing this. I mean, so it was just a question of who was going to win. Was the investigative unit and Sprague of the House Select Committee going to be strong enough to expose CIA Operation 40 and show that they had done these 4 assassinations? John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X. Okay, and so at that point, I personally took a job as a futurist. I was asked to be a futurist at Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto, California. But one of my projects there was to direct the Carter White House extraterrestrial communication study, because Jimmy Carter had just come into office. This was January of 1977. And while I was in Washington with the House Select Committee investigation over the Christmas holidays, I met Jimmy Carter sent a liaison to the House Select Committee on Assassination, a senior lawyer who called me up, and I met with him, and he took me to dinner on Capitol Hill with a whole number of the senior advisors to Carter were there at that dinner at a private house. So we were there, talking, and I said, my God, this is the inner circle of Carter. And, here we are, and we're doing the Kennedy assassination and the HSCA investigation. And I had this other thing going because I had been investigating Carter. Carter had filed an extraterrestrial contact form back in 1973. So, and these are 2 issues that I had been following. So all of a sudden then in January of 1973 or so, I end up in Washington on these 2 issues with the House Select Committee on Assassinations up in Capitol Hill and directing the Carter White House extraterrestrial communication study at the White House. So it's like, but based in Palo Alto and flying back and forth. Okay, so it was pretty amazing time. I think that the best version of the details of how the CIA infiltrated and finally were able to defeat the efforts of Richard Sprague and his investigators and witnesses to unearth and expose CIA Operation 40 is in Richard Sprague's book, The Taking of America 1, 2, 3. And you can get that. It's online for free, and we will link to that. Just go to our website, exopolitics.com, and we will have a link to it a free link to it on the menu. And I think because that, it's a very lengthy book, but you can get you can get into the detail as to how that particular battle was fought. And so, yes, there was an opportunity there to really expose those assassinations. And the CIA and the forces behind the CIA, who were the forces behind the assassination, who trace up to, in my judgment, uh, the City of London banking, 13 banking families, the Rothschilds on down, the monarchies, the UK and the Dutch monarchies, the Rockefellers, all of these that are maintaining the matrix that Kennedy came in and challenged on many different fronts, took him out in a ritualistic assassination. And so, uh, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask? Or
Why once the House Select Committee started, they were calling all of these different witnesses and so on, and quite a few things happened because it was almost like there was a cleaning up team that was going to stop people from becoming whistleblowers. Was that something that you were aware of while it was happening, that this was going on, or how did you feel about that?
well, I mean, it was. I sort of saw the handwriting on the wall. I, as it turned out, right after the committee was established, just coincidentally in my own life, uh, my family had moved out to the West Coast, and I had taken this job in Palo Alto, so I was 3,000 miles away, removed. But I would get these panic calls from Representative Gonzalez's office saying, "Alfred, something's really going on here. It's horrible. The FBI has been here today, and they're just harassing us, and they're harassing Representative Gonzalez." And I knew that they were just shutting the whole thing down, you know. And I knew from periodically I would fly into Washington, and because I would have to go in to do work as a futurist, either on the White House extraterrestrial study or on other studies. And that would give me an opportunity in the evenings to go down to the safe house near DuPont Circle. I think it was on P Street, I'm not sure. Um, and meet with everybody and kind of get briefed. And it was really like amazing warfare. Um, uh, and so I think that what the covert government saw, and the CIA, those behind CIA Operation 40, was that their operation, which had been organized by Richard Nixon, which had been financed, the finance chairman was George H.W. Bush Sr., that had over 100 assassins, CIA assassins in it, was going to be exposed publicly. And remember, this was only 4 years after Watergate.
Mm.
And so they threw everything at it. They did a full court press to knock down the witnesses, to go in and knock down the investigators, to get at the council, to get at the congressmen, anything that they had on any of the congressmen. And it was, that that basic, and to get at the, even at the groups. I know that a number of the members of the uh, Assassination Information Bureau, who were, the directors of it, uh, were really targeted by the by by the COINTELPRO operatives in Washington, and suffered personally. So it was a great battle. It was a great battle.
Mm.
And whether or not that will ever see the official light of day, that remains, I think, for post-American Revolution #2. That if it can ever be honestly said, look, the shadow government killed the president, because we have all the research now, and if they ever want to acknowledge it, same thing with 9/11. It's just the shadow government attacked the U.S. so that it could go out and impose a domestic tyranny at home, and a war of aggression worldwide, so people could make trillions of dollars on two genocidal wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. A couple of contractors. So, that.
But can I ask you?
Yeah.
I have the experience that people are quite aware of the CIA and their way of operating. They're becoming more and more aware of that, and what type of business they're involved in. But with the FBI, I feel that a lot of people still have confidence in them and see them as more like a legal organization that can be trusted. What would your opinion be?
That's a good question, because if we take the role of the FBI in all of the false flags, for example, what was the role of the FBI in the assassination of John F. Kennedy? What was the role of the FBI in the assassination? Hoover was at one of the meetings, pre-assassination meetings. Hoover was one of the conspirators. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So
he was there. He was there at the Clinton Hutchinson lunch.
So Hoover was one of the conspirators. So the FBI doesn't have any integrity around the assassination of John F. Kennedy. If you go into RFK, the FBI is the implementer of COINTELPRO. It implements COINTELPRO. That is going after and harassing and destroying citizens' lives, and destroying people who are trying to advocate for democracy, people who are trying to stand up for their own rights under the Constitution. They're being paid government salaries to destroy all these people, which is anti-constitutional. So they are like the thugs.
Mm.
CIA is like the assassins, and FBI is like the thugs. They're COINTELPRO. What was the role of the FBI in the assassination of Martin Luther King?
Same role.
Integral.
Mm.
If we go to 9/11, what did the FBI do in 9/11? They destroyed evidence.
Mm.
That's what they did.
Mm.
The FBI destroyed all of the evidence at the Pentagon site.
As far as I know, the FBI has supplied and trained or whatever, equipped people for all the different terror acts on American soil.
Yeah. So,
but do you think, is this a rogue element of the organization, or is it the whole FBI as an institution?
Well, look, that's a good question, and in some ways that's a philosophical question, and in some ways that's a factual question, because if you can say, oh well, call it a rogue, but if you have the director of the FBI in on a meeting the night before or 2 days before the Kennedy assassination, planning the assassination, you say, well, he was just a rogue. He was the director of the FBI. I mean, if you have the power structure of the institution that's involved in COINTELPRO, and if their mission is COINTELPRO, then to call it rogue is displacement. That, I think, is displacement, i.e., now you can say, i.e., they say, well, this is counterintelligence. Counterintelligence, well, what if Al-Qaeda is just a front for CIA? You know? I mean, they're just creating these fronts to create more war for their masters, the bankers who make money off of war, and for the, for the Illuminati matrix. So these are just words which are displacements. To me, rogue is a term which is a displacement term. I mean, that's my analysis.
Yeah. No, I was more thinking about the local FBI guy down the street that might not be totally aware of what agenda he's serving, or do you think that that everyone employed there would become aware of what's going on?
I don't know. You can say that the local FBI guy is porch brethren, but I'm sure there's a culture within the FBI that you got to go along with.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember an instance. This is just when I was in 9th grade in New Orleans and at school, and one of my friends at school, we used to go play basketball at his house, and his father was FBI in New Orleans, and the New Orleans chapter of the FBI was instrumental in managing Lee Harvey Oswald and a lot of the people, Bannister and all those people. And his father used to come out at the balcony and watch us play basketball. And I looked up at him, and it was a very sinister guy. So, because those guys were managing the assassination and were managing a lot of very dark stuff going on out of the FBI office in New Orleans. So, for me, the image that is portrayed in TV series like Bones is just propaganda and brainwashing for the public.
I think it's really good that information like this comes out, because I always feel really very bad and for people who get drafted or who volunteers into like military service or whatever it is, and without knowing how they're going to be used. So, but maybe if we can move on, because you have had some incredible battles along the way, battles for justice and truth.
So, well, everybody what was involved. Now, the second major false flag of the that occurred, within our lifetimes was September 11th, 2001, and that again was a planetary false flag. And the perpetrators of 9/11, the planners at the Illuminati level, I believe, intended it to really try and turn the planet into a catastrophic timeline, to really create a kind of a hell on earth. And there's a lot of deep information that goes down in there. And 9/11 is a very complex issue. People can go to exopolitics.com. along the right-hand menu there, we have a a link that says 9/11 false flag. You click on that, and you'll go down to 7 or 8 articles, and that'll show some of the covert technologies, the advanced technologies. These are quantum access technologies that were used in 9/11. It was 9/11 was like a showcase of advanced quantum access technologies. There were 4 of them at least that we can document, and people who want detail of this and how it's done, because I know it seems like magic, and it seems, you go, oh my God, how can you say that? But I just want to list them here, and that is that there were 4 U.S. exotic black ops technology. The first one, and for those of your viewers who are listening to this, your minds may not accept what I'm about to say, but I urge you to go to these articles and begin to read it, because we have whistleblowers who've come from the secret government. Not only one whistleblower, but multiple whistleblowers, and they're all saying the same thing. The first one is what was used was Tesla-based quantum access technology. And with that, to use a common term, it's time travel. And we know from whistleblowing witnesses now, direct witnesses. One is a lawyer in Washington State named Andrew Bashago, who was personally present in 1971. He was part of the time travel project, where he saw that the U.S. DARPA, the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, and the Central Intelligence Agency, DARPA was the technical agency, CIA was the political agency on this project. They had used quantum access technology where they accessed the quantum, in other words, the time-space hologram, where once you have the time coordinates of any event, you can just access them on a chronovisor, which is like a TV set where you can go into any point in the future and in the past and look at it. They had accessed images from September 11, 2001 of the Twin Towers. And he says, he went in with other witnesses, including his father, and into a time science lab in New Mexico, and saw, they were looping it on this screen, this film where planes, what looked like planes, were hitting the Twin Towers. And subsequently, there was a lot of scuttlebutt in this project that, oh yeah, this is like a domestic Pearl Harbor. And the director of this project, the defense liaison of this project, was Donald H. Rumsfeld in 1971, who was a member of the Nixon cabinet. So this ties into CIA Operation 40, ties into the Nixon secret team. So all these people had 30 years. 1971 to 2001 is 30 years. They had 30 years advance notice of 9/11. In other words, they had a 30-year planning horizon. And don't forget that Henry Kissinger was the national security advisor in 1971 of Nixon. So he had access to this information. And Kissinger was the personal appointee of the Wall Street Rockefeller Rothschild crowd. So they've been ruling the world through time travel. That's that's kind of the missing link. And so they had 30 years advance notice. And so that's how, in a way, the Twin Towers were built to be knocked down. Do you follow me?
Mm.
This whole thing was like built to be not knocked down. That's why they got the insurance on the Twin Towers. That's why they set up the Patriot Act. That's why they set up Afghanistan. They had 30 years to plan this event. They had a 30-year planning horizon. And their patsies was a member, practically a member of the Bush family in Saudi Arabia.
This is one thing I've never understood. Why did they choose Bin Laden, where there were connections to the Bush family? That would point in towards themselves.
Yeah, but look at the Reagan assassination.
Yeah, I know.
Who did they use as a patsy? They used the family member, the person who had dinner at what, Neil Bush's house, was it? Yeah. Because these are MK Ultra circles. And so Bin Laden was probably an MK Ultra, type guy.
I still don't, it's hard for me to understand, because I would say, why didn't they choose a real enemy that they could blame it on? Or was it to be able to control him? I still don't really understand why they picked this guy of all guys.
Because Bin Laden was a CIA asset.
And so they could control him while maneuvering him around, while painting him black as a patsy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Bin Laden is a classic patsy. Lee Harvey Oswald.
Timothy McVeigh.
Yeah, patsies in the attempted Reagan assassination, patsies in the JFK, in the RFK. Bin Laden was a classic patsy, and then they did a false Bin Laden assassination under Obama, who's a CIA operative, to give Obama some oomph. It's all phony stuff. It's all phony. Yeah. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's just phony baloney.
Do you know in the film JFK where Dave Ferry, he says it's like a game. Everyone changes sides. Nobody knows who's who, and it's just like a funny game.
Yeah.
But it's just that it's so tragic, the result of the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah.
But I just think one thing you point out is really important as well, that these people that are in government now, white-haired old guys, they have a past. They have been in this for a long, long time. Just like you say, Rumsfeld and Kissinger and Cheney, these people, they didn't just pop up being white-haired in old guys in the White House. They have spent their whole careers doing things and been involved in a lot of these things.
Right. They're all part of this Illuminati secret government, which operates under these occult principles. And so what we did with regard to 9/11 is we said, well, let's get something going in the Congress. And if you look at, we had just had the experience under Bill Clinton, where they appointed an independent prosecutor to impeach Bill Clinton because of alleged perjury he had done around sexual improprieties and other acts. And so in this case, you have the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and other high-ranking officers of the United States violate the Article 3 treason article of the U.S. Constitution, because under the U.S. Constitution, Article 3, the definition is treason is participation in an armed attack on the United States. That's the definition of treason. If you participate in an armed attack on the United States or give aid and abetment to such an attack. And that's what 9/11 was. It was an armed attack on the United States. Boom. So
Yeah.
they committed treason. I mean, just in the letter of the law. So what we did together with a number of other of the leading researchers is we drafted the 9/11 Independent Prosecutor Act. And what you do is that this would be introduced into the House of Representatives so that an independent prosecutor could be appointed to prosecute the sitting president, George W. Bush, the sitting vice president, Richard B. Cheney. Cheney actually was a contemporary of mine at Yale, as was Bush. Cheney was a sophomore when I was a freshman at Yale, but he flunked out. And Bush was a couple of years behind me when I was at law school. So these were guys who were, there. And I've always seen them as, just men without any honor. I don't see them as super kind of guys at all. Just scurrilous men. So what we did is in November of 2006, there was a victory, an electoral victory, in which the neocons, right before that, the neocons lost control of the U.S. Senate. And it looked before that there was going to be like a fascist dictatorship in the U.S. They had control of the White House, they had control of the Senate, and it looked like they were going to, they really were going to push through some very dire stuff. And in the election of November 2006, the neocons lost control of the Senate, and supposedly the Democrats came in. So in the interim between November 2006 and the January, where the new chairman of the Judiciary Committee, a Democrat, John Conyers, would be coming in, we arranged a meeting with senior staff of John Conyers. He was in Detroit. It was over the Thanksgiving weekend, and we presented the 9/11 Independent Prosecutor Act together with a memorandum to the U.S. Congress, showing that there was probable cause and prima facie evidence to show that George W. Bush, Richard B. Cheney, Donald H. Rumsfeld, and others committed Article 3 treason on 9/11. It's all legal, the legal grounds are there, and people can read that by going to exopolitics.com to 9/11, and that memorandum to the Congress is there. The chief of staff saw that, or rather the staff person, the woman, saw that was serious. She said, we're going to send this to Congressman Conyers in Detroit over the Thanksgiving weekend, and he'll get back to you, when he gets back. It went into a dark hole. We've never heard a thing. And that's because both sides of the U.S. Congress are controlled by the CIA. And so you have a nation that is locked down at the executive by the CIA, at the legislature, the Congress, by the CIA, And if you go to to the to the court, to the Supreme Court, somebody said, some people say that Justice Roberts, you know, he, by his rulings, he should have voted against Obamacare,
Mm.
but he voted for it because he's CIA. So it's, they, there is no more U.S. government. And that was the whole function of the CIA coup by Operation 40 in 1963, when they assassinated Kennedy, and then in 9/11, when they eviscerated domestic civil rights and, went out to the air. So we have people like Edward Snowden, who's at least brought a bit of fresh air. People say, oh, he's a plant. No, I don't think so. Because now in Europe, the Europeans and most of the world have really kind of woken up and are aligning themselves differently from the U.S. The U.S. is becoming anathema. So it's like Europe is waking up to what happened on November 22nd, 1963.
I know, it's incredible.
50 years later, it's taken, and it took Edward Snowden to do that. So it's remarkable how these things work. But that's the story of, as far as we know, the farthest that has been attempted to get an official investigation of 9/11 going. Do you have any questions?
No, I just, if we could move on, because you didn't stop there, you continued and ended up in Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah. Well, there, I was a speaker at the 2007 War Crimes Conference in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. This was brought together under the a peace organization that had been formed by Tun Dr. Mahathir bin Mohammed, who was the Prime Minister of Malaysia, and really was responsible for bringing Malaysia into the 21st century. And very much a person concerned with human rights and world peace. And I arrived in Malaysia in 2007, and when I went in to meet him, he said, "Oh, would you like to be a judge on a war crimes tribunal that we're forming?" And I said, "Okay, sure, we'll do it." And this went on for about 5 years, and one of the key cases that we did was a war crimes case on the highest level of war crimes against George W. Bush and Tony Blair on the Nuremberg level war crimes for the invasion of Iraq. And we were, the tribunal is what they call a citizens' tribunal of conscience. And that is where the organs of justice, the tribunals and courts of the international world, say the International Criminal Court and all of the national courts under the Treaty of Rome statute, which allows national courts to prosecute war criminals with universal jurisdiction, sort of as the base level courts to the International Criminal Court. There had been over 40 complaints at the International Criminal Court for against war crimes by U.S. and U.K. armed forces in Iraq, and the chief prosecutor at the ICC, International Criminal Court, had dismissed them. So that's why this tribunal was formed and went forward. And we heard in-person witnesses who had been tortured at Abu Ghraib. who had been tortured in Afghanistan, at Guantanamo. We showed that the entire weapons of mass destruction was a fraud, and that this was what they call a war of aggression. It was an intentional invasion and a violation of the Nuremberg principles. And the date of our judgment, just coincidentally, was November 22nd, 2011.
Wow.
On the 48th anniversary of the assassination. Now, so people say, well, so that happened, nothing's going to happen to them. Well, no, because we were proceeding under natural law. And natural law is the design of justice in the universe. See, people know when something is just or unjust. That's what the whole jury system is based on. And that is, people know when something is just and something is unjust in their guts. And all social law and criminal law, like laws against murder, laws for the fulfillment of contracts, laws around marriage, matrimony, all of that, that's all based on natural law, which is part of the design of the universe. And so our tribunal was acting under natural law as well as under international humanitarian law, under the Geneva Conventions. So we had the force of nature behind us. So at two levels, one at the karmic level, our judgment came down against George W. Bush, the son of George H.W. Bush, on November 22nd, 1963. And George H.W. Bush, as you know, was in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. In fact, you're the one who taught me that he was in the Daltex building, I think, coordinating some of the shooters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and but also after that, immediately after that, I was in Kuala Lumpur, and I had been invited to speak at a conference in Johannesburg, South Africa, right after that. So I traveled from Kuala Lumpur through Hong Kong and then down to Johannesburg, down to Adam's Calendar, this kind of where supposedly the Anunnaki ETs landed about 280,000 years ago. And right at that moment, in that same week, George W. Bush came over and did a greenwash trip. Oh, I'm here to cure AIDS.
Okay.
Notwithstanding that it was U.S. Rangers in the 1990s that had brought AIDS to Africa because the AIDS virus had been inserted into smallpox vaccinations which U.S. Rangers gave in Africa. Okay? With the CIA. I mean, this is how evil these guys are. So so Bush came to the three countries surrounding South Africa. Like, is that an accident or a coincidence? So then at that moment, the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Commission, because we had instructed them to go to all the governments to enforce our judgment, right? They contacted the governments of those three adjacent countries to South Africa. But they said, oh, my God, it's because it was kind of quick, but there was still a kerfuffle where they could have enforced it. But the government said, oh, it's too quick because it was just a matter of days, right? But I'm just giving you kind of the inside story.
So these verdicts are still...
Yeah. Because a few months after that, Tony Blair did a trip to South Africa where he had to leave early because a large part of South African civil society, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, took official proceedings to demand his arrest, where they went for an arrest warrant based on our judgment of November 22nd, 2011. Now, that shows you, with that degree of synchronicity, that there's natural law justice behind these verdicts.
And also the incredible importance of what people like you have done, Alfred. Absolutely astounding.
Thank you very much. There's also been a judgment which I did not participate in this tribunal for various confused reasons, which I won't go into. You can go to Breaking News, another website that I have for the long story behind it. But that is finding for the crime of genocide against the state of Israel for their war crimes against Palestine, going back to the 1948 war. And what happened in 1948 was an ethnic cleansing of Palestine, in which 1.5 million Palestinians were ethnically cleansed. And under Plan Dalit, Plan D. And there are a number of very good books about this, so that Israel was founded on a totally unlawful genocidal invasion. And it's only because of their alliance with the Rothschilds and with world banking and the control of the press and world brainwashing that this has allowed to continue. So that judgment is there as well. Now, the final, because I know that is with the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State. I was asked just recently to become a judge on the tribunal and to be part of the International Common Law Courts of Justice. And I told them that I was very honored, but that I would rather remain what I am, which is in the background, an informal legal advisor to them. And also I do broadcasts around their issues. And people can go to itccs.org for the updates, but essentially they have established a worldwide international common law court of justice that has gone in and begin to take up the slack where the national courts have refused to act, where there's serious war crimes. And people can go to the website. You can download the manual of how to set up an international, of how to be a juror on these courts, because these are citizen courts. And there are a new series of courts, a brand new action against chemtrails, which is starting in the U.S., an action, International Common Law Court of Justice against chemtrails, which are part of the world depopulation agenda. Chemtrails is a component part of the HARP chemtrails weapon of mass destruction, and is used in weather warfare, like Katrina, or like the Haitian hurricane in which 200,000 people died, and many other things in the Fukushima nuclear false flag event, in which many people may die because of radiation. That tribunal has an upcoming trial in Brussels, Belgium, starting on March 31st, 2014, for child genocide and child trafficking against Jorge Mario Bergoglio, known as Pope Francis, and Queen Elizabeth. the UK Queen, and this is based on actual evidence. For example, there's a member, former member of the Argentine government at the time of the junta, who will be testifying to Pope Bergoglio's involvement in child trafficking in Argentina at that time. And Queen Elizabeth, we have witnesses to the fact that Queen Elizabeth and her consort Prince Philip came here to British Columbia with her consort Prince Philip to Kamloops. It's a city here in BC, north of where I am right now, in October of 1964, and went to a Native American and an Aboriginal residential school and picked out 10 children, 5 young girls and 5 young boys, and they were never seen again. We don't know if they were sold into sexual slavery or, something of that sort, or they were butchered in some ritual murder. But there's a lot of other evidence. People can go again to itccs.org for all of the evidence in these cases. And a sheriff from the itccs.org, sheriffs from the itccs.org will be serving the Pope and the Queen personally at their meeting in Rome on April 3rd, 2014, with the warrants and the summons.
Mind-blowing.
This is citizen justice under natural law. See, the Matrix is so dumb that they've forgotten that you can't just form a legislature and make up laws. Laws under jurisprudence relate to deeper principles in nature. They relate to justice and to other, aside from constitutional principles, having to adhere to constitutional principles, but they adhere to forces in nature. So if you're going against nature and you try to create the laws, you're running into nature. And now citizens have nature on their side.
Mm.
And so that's what Blair's running into, Bush is running into, that's what the Matrix is running into. CIA Operation 40, all of these people are running into these deep principles that in fact govern law. And I've taught law at Yale University. I've taught law at the University of Texas. I've been an international lawyer at one of the more advanced and prestigious international law firms. And I've been a judge. So I have some knowledge of the law.
I can just say it's absolutely wonderful to hear. You really spread hope, Alfred. You really gave the rest of us a feeling of hope that it is possible and that you can really make a difference. So I would just like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you've done for us and showing us the way of how to be a real human being.
Well, thank you. And I want likewise to thank you for your work and for your path.
With these beautiful words, I just want to say, hasta la vista, baby. You take care. Thank you so much.
Sure.